Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The speaker is live, we're alive, and we have a Friday surprise. But I'll get to that later. First, let me do the part that, the announcements that I would usually make, and then we'll get on to the Mystery Friday program. We want to, first of all, thank our corporate sponsors very much. They're responsible for us being able to have these broadcasts over radio and public television. And this month they are Weyerhaeuser Company Foundation, Legacy Health Systems, and the Wells Fargo Bank. Oh, by the way, I'm Corleen Kraft, President-elect, and I'm not nervous. we have breaking news by the instant here about how this program is going to shake down this afternoon. So let us get on, first of all, with the announcements, and then we'll get on to the mystery part, as I said. That, for example, might be part of the breaking news. The research board is looking for a few good men and women. We have a short-term study that's coming up. It's a ballot measure on the People's Utility District that's been proposed. It will go on the November ballot. So we're looking for people for a short-term study. Meetings hopefully will begin in August. And it should be a fairly interesting and possibly contentious outcome. So that should be quite an interesting one to serve on. In addition, they're looking for people who are willing to serve for a year on a research study on how to best finance K through 12 education in the Portland School District. And that will be year-long, and we're looking for people not necessarily with a background in finance, but people who have an interest in this issue and helping to resolve it. Anybody who's interested in either of those research possibilities, please get in touch with Wade Fickler at the City Club. Today our board host, who has not changed, is Katie King. And she's our go-to girl in the legislature, and she's been helping us. Well, that's alliterative, so that's why I can use girl. She's been helping us set up all of the interesting programs that we get from the legislature because she serves as the Intergovernmental Relations Liaison for the Department of Human Services, Health Services. In addition to that, she's chair of the membership committee, and she's also on the program committee. So she's a busy woman. And last but not least, in her spare time, she has written a mystery called City of Suspects. Look out for your name, thinly veiled. And there's also a very cheeky heroine, probably also thinly veiled, and that book will be published in September. Now, we had a Board of Governors retreat last weekend, spent many, many hours coming up with how we see the future of the City Club, and we've set some goals that will be coming out. A couple of them we've met today, quite by accident. One is to be more nimble, so we are working diligently on that. And the second is to increase our focus on helping develop leadership in our membership. Today we were scheduled to have three of our outstanding City Club members, Brad Avakian, Greg McPherson, and Mitch Greenlick, all of whom are City Club members and are who exemplify the fact that leaders can be grown through the City Club, and they have all had an enormous output of community service for many years, as well as being active in the City Club. Today, however, there's a debate on the House floor about education funding, and so Brad and Greg are still there. Happily, Mitch Greenlick has agreed to be here so that we won't have to be quite as nimble. Jane Cease, a former state senator, has agreed to make some comments until the very last second, and I haven't heard what the latest breaking news is. We were going to have Greg and Brad on a speakerphone. I do not know. Are they? Nope, that's a no-go. So what we'll do is we will have Mitch Greenlick, who, lest I forget, they were all, by the way, freshman legislators, and they are graduate students when it comes to community service, and they all passed the Willamette Week test. So I think that in itself is a good recommendation. Mitch, in his first term, has been serving on the Transportation Committee, and I expect that Ray will be standing up at the mic first, after Katie. He also serves on the Environment and Land Use Committee, and he's been an ex officio member because of his long interest in healthcare services. He's been an ex officio member of the Oregon Health Plan Committee. Probably his biggest claim to fame, and maybe one of the most important things he's done outside of raising an outstanding family, is he set up a research center for Kaiser Permanente, the Center for Health Research, and it has grown under his leadership to become the largest health service research center in the Northwest. So I will now, without further ado, one hopes, Mitch will be speaking for about 20 minutes, and then we'll go to Jane for some reaction, and then Katie will have the first question. Thank you. Mitch Greenlick.
I'm very happy to be here. This is a daunting audience for me because I have so many friends in it. I'm very happy to be here. I have my son Mike and my daughter Phyllis and my wife, and then a room full of people that I've worked with over the past nearly 40 years that I've been in Portland, and that makes it hard. And it's always easier to talk to strangers. They don't know what to expect. My job, I think, is twofold. My job is to talk about what my impressions are as a first-term legislator, having been involved in city club activities and other kinds of activities, how that life changes by moving down to the legislature. And I'll talk a little bit about what my objectives were when I went down to the legislature, and I'll talk a little bit about some impressions that I've had in terms of how that process worked. I have I think, a unique history with the City Club, unique of anybody in this room, and certainly unique of at least half of the people in this room. I'm one of 3 people who resigned from the City Club in 1969 after the City Club voted the 3rd time not to allow women into the club. It wasn't only my gender political perspective on this, it was also when the argument from the floor was you wanted not to have women in the City Club because women didn't work, and therefore they would be able to come early and get the best seats. And I thought if that was the level of reasoning, it was probably time for me to be somewhere else. I had relatively modest expectations when I went down to Salem. They reinforced those modest expectations very quickly by pointing out that as a freshman member of the minority caucus, and a 25-35 minority at that, they would show how much status I have by giving me the 58th choice of office and the 57th choice of parking place, and by making me sit right up in the front row where the speaker could keep an eye on me if I acted up. So it reinforced physically the notion of what it meant to be a freshman. Just like in school and other places, the important people sit at the back, and the poor freshmen who have nothing to do but read the bills and speak and vote don't have time for all that important stuff like talking to reporters and talking to the other leaders. So I'm in front, and I actually like being up in front. I had 3 sets of objectives when I set off to Salem, and I try and keep them in front of me all the time during my activities down there, and in fact they've helped me feel that my overall experience has just been a joy. I mean, you hear a lot of grumbling about service in the legislature, but the fact is I haven't had this much fun in a long time. It's been very enjoyable. First, my objective, and I told the speaker this as we discussed my committee assignments, my objective was to try and make things better that were going to come through the legislature anyway. I didn't think necessarily I was going to change the world, but I did think that as bills came through the committee, with some of the skills I had, I could really end up with making them, improving bills as they ultimately came through. And that was very important as I began to build relationships with the other members of the committees, and particularly with the chair of the two very important committees that I served on, Transportation and Environment Land Use. As some of you know me, you know I have quite a background in health, and that disqualified me from the Health Committee, but but maybe that will change because of my second objective. And my second objective was to build bridges for future relationships with folks on the other side of the aisle. That it seemed to me, whether the Democrats ever retake the majority or not, the important things of this kind of process can only come about through bipartisan activity. And I thought my long-term relationships with the people on the other side of the aisle, as well as the people on my own side of the aisle, were very important. And in spite of what the Willamette Week said about me at various times in their assessment, that kind of relationship building, I think, is one of my important skills, and that's been honed through 35 years of corporate life and work at the university, where, again, you really can't do anything on your own. If you're going to do important things in those settings and in most other settings, you need to have relationships with people who are not necessarily your natural allies, because folks become allies on very specific issues, and those kind of relationships, which I understand can be very long-term, especially if term limits have really gone away, were very important to me. And third, I wanted to introduce new ideas for future consideration. I wanted to be able to bring some of the big ideas to the legislature that are very hard to move in the legislature and almost never move in a single session. You have to introduce those ideas, get people used to them, build bridges across sessions, build allies on those ideas, and I'm very happy with, I think, my ability to do that. Among the what some people call weird ideas that I introduced, but ideas which to me are so obvious and inevitable that they will ultimately happen, was my proposal to merge Portland State and Oregon Health Sciences University. That's an idea. I sat in the state's economic summit and heard that one of the problems of moving toward economic development in the metropolitan area was that we had a Tier 4 university, and that a Tier 4 university really didn't help us in the economic development side. It came to me that I could create a Tier 2 university instantly by simply putting PSU and OHSU together, and these are two totally complementary institutions. The idea, of course, was absolutely and strongly rejected by the only three people that mattered in this discussion, or maybe four if you include the House Chair of Education, the President of PSU, the President of OHSU, and the Chancellor, who, for other reasons, thought this was perhaps the most threatening and worst thing that each of them had ever heard. And, you know, it's university presidents can be very narrow in their view of the world. I was concerned with introducing the notions of a practical way to create universal access to health care. We had just suffered through the huge defeat of Measure 23, a single-payer system, and it seemed to me, my experience tells me there are other ways, and I introduced what eventually I hope will be a state way of doing it. I was interested in elevating Forest Park into a position of recognition of how important a state treasure Forest Park really is, and that the concerns for Forest Park are not really only a concern for the city of Portland or for Multnomah and Washington County or for Metro, but really are a concern to the people of this state and, in fact, the people of the region. And that's taking a strange path, and I'll be happy to talk about where that's gone. I've been concerned with, I only made Katie nervous on this one, with the creation of a cabinet-level Department of Public Health. And the scramble that you've seen lately for where the Ways and Means process is rejecting public health grants is partly the result of the fact that public health doesn't have the proper standing in state government to really make the kind of statement at the legislature that needs to be made. Another one I'll be back with in the next session. And finally, I was concerned with increasing the social usefulness of Oregon Investment Council investments, and that came out in the form of House Bill 3613 that I worked jointly with Associated Oregon Industries, an unusual coalition, but a part of the kind of coalition building models that I had. A predetermined liberal freshman Democrat and the Associated Oregon Industries working together to deal with the future of industrial development. One of the things that came clear to me as a so-called left-wing freshman, I had an epiphany early in this session. And that epiphany was that if we want to have proper health care, if we want to have proper education, if we want to have proper social services, that all requires money. And in a state that's dependent on the income tax, it came to me in the middle of the night one night that we needed to have income. Now, you would have thought it's something I would have thought about through campaigning over 3 years, how obvious that position was. And I did make statements about it in campaigning, but the fact is, it becomes painfully obvious on days like today when the Republicans are putting forth an education budget that's totally and completely inadequate, a budget that will shorten school years across the state, a budget that will increase class size, a budget that will cut curriculum, and they're doing it by saying, we don't have enough income. And certainly you wouldn't expect us to raise taxes. Income is critical, and in order to have income, industrial development is critical. We managed to avoid the effects of a recession in the mid-90s because of the boom in this state, but we weren't able to withstand this, and it's time for all of us to work together, particularly those of us on the left, to make sure we withstand the ravages of any of these future recessions. My overall impression of the legislature is that in spite of everything you hear to the contrary, the legislature amazingly works to do most of the work that it has to do. We've passed, I don't know what the number is, 1,000 bills perhaps already this year. Today, actually, incidentally, I missed my first vote on any of those bills, and that didn't feel very good, but I was happy to be here with you anyway. And you know, there are 15 volumes of Oregon statutes, and those statutes need constant revision. There's all sorts of stuff that goes on in the housekeeping of the state, and most of the work that goes on, going through committees on both sides, going through two bodies, is very important work to the health and the future of the state. It's not the passing the school budget. It's not the big hot political question, should we provide pollution tax credit for industries or shouldn't we provide them? Should we change land use planning? It's mostly bills to make things work better that have to work for our state to get along. And interestingly, I've been considering the question of the factors that influence decision making, and I've been looking at the kind of decisions we make. And the truth of the matter is, 60 or 70% of the decisions we make are basically a unanimous vote. I mean, most of the daily work of the legislature has been done before bills come to the floor. And most of the time, there'll be one or two or three people that will be a negative vote. I asked one of my colleagues one day why he voted the way he did on a bill. I'll say not a colleague in my caucus, why he voted the way he did on the bill, and he looked at me sort of abashedly and said, oh, well, when the vote came up, I was reading the wrong bill. So there are, fortunately, I haven't had that happen to me yet. I've managed to figure out which bill I was voting on almost all the time, having read them all at least once at that point. But basically, the legislature works very hard and does a very good job. And I say that as a member of the minority who's frequently disappointed by outcomes in bills. But most of the bills, this is a guess, I haven't worked it out, but I intend to, say 60% are basically unanimous. That means they're passed with less than, say, 8 or 10 opposing votes, and usually 1 or 2 or none. Of the other bills, about, I'd say, 30%, maybe 25%, are split, but not split along party lines. 3613, my bill, the first time it went to the House, had critics until we worked it out. Some of the unions were worried about whether we were going to be spending money inappropriately, risking their pension funds. Some of the conservatives thought that maybe it was a bad idea for some other reasons, and the bill got 32 votes out of the House, and it was basically split between Republicans and Democrats. A lot of the bills are that way. They split on for conceptual reasons rather than for political reasons. And it's only 10 or 15% of the votes, although many of them are the most important ones, that lock up along political lines. And I mean, consequently, the legislature usually does its work. Second, the important thing is that the divisions in the legislature, and there are really huge divisions, and this is the problem we're reaching a budget right now, are divisions that are reflective of true divisions in the state. I was touring a group of 4th graders around, and one of the 4th graders asked me, what's the difference between Democrats and Republicans? I mean, that was something I had to think of, standing up talking to 4th graders. And what came to me was that the difference between Republicans and Democrats as they're reflected in the State House of Representatives is a difference in the perception of what's the role of government. So incidentally, I think the same split that you see in the U.S. Congress. One side believes that government should be as small as possible, and that the role of the individual should be as large as possible, and consequently, that side wants to do everything to reduce the size of government wherever they find it. That's one of the issues, I think, in refusing public health grants. Why are they refusing public health grants? Because they think they're bad? No. They're refusing public health grants because it gives state agencies money to hire employees and do something, and that's against the ideological perspective that the role of the government should be smaller. The other side generally believes, and this is just a general view, that there are important things in our society that need to be done by government, and the role of government in those things at least should be strengthened and therefore enhanced. And now that comes into fiscal policy, it comes into all sorts of things, but the basic division is the division between those two perspectives. And I can tell you it is not an urban-rural split. It's a split. My district is roughly half Multnomah County and half Washington County, roughly 40% city, 40% suburb, and 20% rural. And I see in my email that difference coming up very specifically. So it is not just a rural-urban split, although and in fact, the folks who live in rural areas now are beginning to know that they need to have the state do things for their communities so their communities can rebound in a way that can make some sense. Finally, I just wanted to comment on the role of constituents. Well, maybe I should comment on the role of lobbyists as well as the role of constituents, because those are two very important groups. And I'm not really talking in this case about a lobbyist like Katie, who's really a sort of intergovernmental relations person, and not the same kind of lobbyist of, let's say, the FL-CIO on the one hand, Associated Oregon Industries, organizations like that, the Farm Bureau. These are organizations that have a very powerful influence on the way the work goes on in the legislature. I mean, it's been quite interesting. I'm working now on a bulk purchasing act which for drugs, which I think we might actually have a chance to pass. And once I got pharma and SEIU on the same side of the table working for it, life changed, because those were important forces in the two caucuses. And when you get those kind of important forces moving, things happen. And the important thing of lobbyists is not so much that they come in and say to Mitch, I'm going to give you $1,000 if you vote for me next time, or I did give you $1,000 if last time, you should vote for me now. It's that they can make things happen so that bills get consideration that otherwise wouldn't get consideration. And I've seen that happen on the leadership side in the House with organizations like Oregonians in Action, Associated Oregon Industries, Pharma. It's nice to be on the same side with them on some of these issues because that gets you to move your ideas. But they are very important in making things move, not necessarily on their influence in the individual legislators. The people that influence individual legislators are constituents. And we listen very carefully. People ask me, what can I do to stop X? Or what can I do to make sure X? And I say, talk to your own representative and your own senator. Because when I get an angry email from Coos Bay, and it comes to me, either to me alone or it comes to me with 60 other people on it, I frequently delete it without reading it. Because I can't, I know I'm not going to take into account everybody's position throughout the state, but I am responsible in a very clear way for the 52,000 citizens that live in House District 33. Does that mean that I take a poll and decide how to vote? No, it definitely doesn't. But what it does mean is I listen and I pay attention. And in many of the issues where I don't have an ideological position in advance, 15 emails from my constituents can be very, very critical. And what I can tell you is don't waste your time sending messages to people except your own representative and your own senator unless you have a special relationship with them. Although you can always send some to the speaker because, well, the Speaker of the House has a responsibility beyond that of being a member of the majority party. The Speaker of the House is responsible for the House. And I think it's perfectly appropriate for citizens of the state to let the institution know how they feel. In closing, let me just say it's been a joy in my first term. It's been an honor and a privilege to serve you and to serve the 52,000 people in House District 33 and the other people of the state. And I'm having a great time and hope I get back next time. Thank you.
Hi there. I'm Jane Cease, the nimble senator, former senior senator from the Cease household. And I'm not going to talk long. I just want to agree with a lot that Mitch said, and it seems to me that he's done very well in his learning curve. I remember things that I thought about when I was a freshman. One was that, wow, you become honorable overnight, and of course, and you already have this large ego that's had to survive a campaign. So you got to not let that get in your way of listening and learning and thinking that you really know what it's like. And it sounds to me as if Mitch has done that very well. The learning curve that you have, even if you think you have experienced the legislature as an observer or lobbying it, the learning curve is like 90-degree angle right straight up, and it's heavy duty, it's complex, it's broad, because the state of Oregon is not some monolithic, everybody agrees kind of a state. It's like a great big patchwork quilt with, little checks over here and little flowers up there, and every piece of it is different, and there are different things that come at you, and all of those people with all of those different opinions want you to listen to them, and you have to figure out how you're going to spend your day doing what you really need to do, which is reading the bills. I'm so delighted to hear a freshman say, he's reading the bills. I have seen plenty of freshmen who don't do that, and you lose a lot. Maybe not knowing which bill you're voting on or what you're going to do about it if you don't do that. But and of course the work is done ahead of time or in committee, and I reiterate what Mitch says, that a huge number of the bills are just the day-to-day business of let's operate state government and making that work right. And what you hear are all of the conflict. Now, and the conflict comes not only from the other side, but I remember my shock when I was a freshman in 1979, and we were trying to get Hardy Myers elected speaker, and we couldn't get 31 Democratic votes to do that because there was a group of conservative Democrats who became known as the Hornets, which subsequently named a household of women legislators that Gretchen Kafori and I started. We started staying together, that became known as the Queen Bees, but and we were too, and still are. But anyhow, so it was a real shock to me that it took us 6 weeks inside of my own Democratic caucus to get Hardy elected speaker. But we finally did that at something like 2 o'clock in the morning. I think one of the things that has happened since I was a freshman in 1979, and that's happened, I think, starting probably nationally in the 80s and continuing until now, is that one of the biggest barriers that we have in the Oregon legislature, in Oregon, and in the United States today is we have a lot of government controlled by people who really, as Mitch said, don't believe in a lot of government. In some cases, I think they don't believe in any government, and a lot of the time they think that, the less legislation is better, unless, of course, as I experienced in the legislature, there's a business here that wants to regulate its competition, in which case government regulation is wonderful if you can get it done. But I think the combination of, let's see, this is my left, but it's your right, of the anti-government true believers who don't respect differences, and then on the other hand, the pro-government true believers who don't respect differences is a really difficult thing to overcome. And it's those personal relationships in a small body. 90 people is a relatively small body in the Senate in Oregon. It's only 30 people in the House. It's only 60. But those kinds of differences and the lack of respect for them creates situations like the situation that's ongoing today. And you can ask Mitch a little bit more about it. I heard that they're having perhaps some sort of a revolution maybe inside of the Republican caucus with people who don't want to vote for the education budget, and I'll just keep my fingers crossed that they keep on doing that. But I think that you want to ask questions. I'm going to get out of the way and try not to answer any unless somebody really wants me to, and let Mitch do that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. As you know, one of the privileges of City Club is having the opportunity to ask questions of our speaker. Question. It's phrased in 30 seconds, and it is not a statement. We're here to respect our guests and to ask a question, and I will wield this forcefully. Thank you. And Katie King now will ask the first question.
In California recently, legislators were caught off guard when a supposedly private caucus meeting was broadcast throughout the building. What actually happens behind closed doors in the House Democratic Caucus and the Senate Democratic Caucus? What is a typical meeting like? What roles do each of the members play in the meetings? And is there a secret handshake?
The only secret handshake that I've learned this year has been the secret handshake for people who wanted to have self-service gasoline, and that's this. That was the only. First, the issue that you didn't ask, Katie, you were polite enough not to ask, is should the press be allowed in the caucus meetings? And it's very clear to me that it doesn't make a bit of difference whether the press is allowed in the minority caucus meeting. And I would have this. I would have this position, whichever party was in the majority. The the truth of the matter is, when there is a 35-member caucus, that caucus is deciding the outcome of bills. And in that case, it seems to me the public has a right to be in that discussion. Now, certainly, if the majority caucus had the press allowed, then it would be obvious. The minority caucus ought to be as well, but for the press to be sitting in on a minority caucus isn't very interesting. Our meetings, the Democratic House caucus is an extraordinary caucus. 22 of the 25 members of the caucus have advanced degrees. And the people who don't have advanced degrees are equally intelligent, and I mean, it's really an amazing caucus. So the discussion is I think, very useful, very at a relatively thoughtful plane. We have in this caucus very little dividing us. I mean, there are few, in fact none at the moment, of the people on the left that Jane characterized that we've seen for a long time. And I think it's because politics has moved much more to the center, so that I don't think we've had a serious, angry debate since I've been there, which I think is quite unusual. I don't think that's the count. I know the Democratic Senate caucus is a whole different matter. That their senators are different than representatives. They have a different view of the world. But our caucus is very mild. There's not a whole lot interesting that goes on, actually.
Katie wanted me to also comment. When I went from the House to the Senate, I asked somebody. Yeah, I changed overnight. I became even more honorable and smarter and all of that kind of stuff. But I asked somebody in the Senate what the Senate caucus was like, and they thought a minute, and they said, well, it's sort of like a Quaker meeting where you sit around and then someone is moved to stand up and say something, and then someone else may or may not be later moved to stand up and say something. And then when I got there, I was talking to that person after I had experienced it, and I said, well, I think you're right, except it was like sort of a Cubist Quaker meeting where someone stood up once and you saw this angle, and they stood up another time and maybe you saw this angle, but I would say that I really believe that a caucus's function is really to serve as a communication place where you can be at ease with communicating with your fellow legislators. And I would really have a hard time having the press in a caucus. You're gonna make a decision on whatever you're talking about in the caucus in a public place, and it's going to be noted and all of that. But you can you can have a fight. I mean, it's sort of like having a family fight at home with some strange neighbor sitting in and participating or watching you, somebody that you don't know very well. And I think as long as all of the public processes for the actual decision when it's made and recording all of that and recording the debate, as long as those things are in place and the rest of it, I think it helps move business along faster if you've got the caucus for your internal family communication.
Hello, my name is Pavel Goberman. I'm a member of City Club and candidate for U.S. Senate in next year election. Caroline, you asked about leaders. Okay, please vote for me in next year in May as U.S. Senator. I will lead state in next.
Government, that's not appropriate. Do you have a question, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
My question is to Oregon Legislature, most of them to McPherson. He is member of Judicial Committee. He asked Mitch to send my question to him. Oregon Legislature is Judicial Committee. State court accept money, but dismissed all cases. I informed I informed Oregon legislature of why judges violated United States Constitution, raping Constitution. Ask him, please, question.
I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Dustin Bueller, City Club member, also somebody who serves on the staff in Salem, and would like to commend Representative Greenlick for his service down there. My question is, as somebody who also serves in really the only minority caucus in the building, there's a difference, I think, there's a struggle between being an aggressive minority caucus and a cooperative one. And that struggle has, there's a balance, and each legislator in that caucus thinks that that balance point is different. I'd be interested in hearing really both your thoughts on that, how you balance that and how that works in Salem.
Well, I think that's a very important question. We in the Minority Caucus represent a very large number of citizens of Oregon, and it's our responsibility to represent those people as strenuously and as strongly as we possibly can. So on the one hand, it's very important for us to understand what our position is, to have a very clear-cut policy objective, and to be moving very strongly to try and achieve those policy objectives. Now, generally speaking, in order to achieve those policy objectives, you have to have at least a modicum of good relationships with the other parties, since they control every piece of the process. Sometimes it comes down to the place where the minority caucus really has critical power. And the example of what's going on the floor today, and I don't know how it's coming out, but my prediction is it'll come out 35 yes, 24 no's for a very bad school budget. Now that's a problem to me, but the bigger problem is that party cannot move that budget without a revenue package that goes with it. And the revenue package that goes with it needs to have 36 votes and not 31 votes. And the truth of the matter is, this is the time for us to be working together. The Republicans have asked for one Democratic vote for their revenue package, and my perspective is, and here's where I think we need to be very strong, Dustin, my perspective is we have to be compromising, and we need to have a bipartisan package if it's going to pass the Senate and be signed by the governor, and that means not a package that has 35-1, even if one of us were willing to do it, or even if the caucus was willing to give it a courtesy vote to move it. It needs to come out of the House 18-18 in order to move. So now's the time where the Democratic caucus is standing very strong, because we believe that we need to be in true communication this budget, that this needs to come out a bipartisan budget that meets the needs of the political needs of both sides and the schools, which is the most important thing. And now I think you'll find the caucus standing up and being much stronger.
I think that the role of the minority makes it even more incumbent upon them that they do decide what their goals are, what they want to push, what they want to prioritize to do first, or what's the most important, the least important. And it makes a burden on the minority even more, that they have to stick together in order to be able to get things accomplished. And you can get things accomplished. And I think you have to stick to your convictions and politely and respectfully communicate them, and not blindside the other side. I mean, you can go and say, well, if this is coming out, here's what we got to do, not wanting to insult anyone or anything like that. But, we feel very strongly, and we're going to have to stand up and say this on the floor or whatever. And, and when it's all over, we'll all sit down and get to the next bill. And so the respect thing becomes very important, and always is as well anywhere. But it's incumbent on the minority to get stuff done, and not to be silent, but to push and stick to their convictions and do it together.
Chris Smith, club member. little known trivia fact that 2 years ago I was busy running for the legislature and understanding what was happening with redistricting and who was this guy named Greenlick who is now part of my district. But I'm delighted with the outcome, and thank you, Mitch, for being here today. And I hope the state police don't come to drag you back for a vote before we're finished.
I haven't excused that.
I'm going to ask you about Forest Park, since that's in our mutual district and practically in my backyard. Certainly I'm a fan of protecting the park and the wildlife corridor, that habitat corridor that's part of. But I also know that the land that was added to the urban growth boundary went through a planning process at Metro that I think was pretty good this time around in terms of the UGB expansion. And I know that Thousand Friends has opposed the effort to exclude that land in the legislature from the UGB on the grounds that the legislature shouldn't be meddling in individual UGB discussions. So my question to you is, I wouldn't have expected you to be on the opposite side of Thousand Friends on many issues. Can you explain where you are and sort of how you see the issue shaping up?
Well, first of all, I'm not on the opposite side of Thousand Friends, although they had some issues and in fact did not testify against even the first version of the bill. I think that's right, but they were certainly on board by the time the bill got into a form that actually could be considered. I do believe that Forest Park is a state treasure, and there is a section of the original land use bills that talks about areas of special state concern. The fact is, LCDC has never had the money to do the work to create an area of special state concern, but if there ever was an issue of special state concern, it's Forest Park. I was working through the Forest Park bill and had worked through amendments that had Thousand Friends, the city, Metro, Washington County, all on board at the time the bill was kidnapped by Oregonians in Action to add to the bill this so-called Dorothy English provision, which was a specific provision. It was an odd provision, and it said anybody who's owned 22 acres of land in Multnomah County since before 1955 was entitled to have the county create 6 lots out of that 22 acres. And having done that, they forced me to be in opposition to my own bill. They were nice enough not to add that to my bill, which they had the power to do, but to bring in another bill so I could consistently vote against it from the very beginning, as I have. That bill, over my objections, went over to the Senate. There was an amendment in the Senate that put the language the city wanted about the planning of Forest Park, language that I could accept, that the city accepted and was good language, but still had the Dorothy English provision. The bill was passed in the Senate, and the governor's announced he's going to veto it properly. I tried at that point to intervene and see whether I could get the House to non-concur with the Senate amendments so we could get it into a conference committee and get it straightened out. I was told the Republican majority want it to concur. They want the governor to veto it, and I'm still looking for the opportunity yet in another bill to create a bill with the language that the city has now written that everybody seems to agree with on the process. But I still haven't given up the idea that I think this should be an area of special state concern, because in fact it is.
Thanks.
Ray Polani, a City Club member. You sit on the transportation, environment, and land use. I don't think there's any question. They're all interrelated, and one determines the others and so forth. And of course, where the money goes, that's where we end up. My question is this: wouldn't it be time for voters to take a look again at the constitutional restriction that creates a highway trust fund, and as a minimum make it a transportation trust fund, or as a maximum do what everybody else in the world is doing, use it as a revenue source to put in the general fund so that transportation, so that highways will fare as well as education, correction, and everything else. Would you?
Yeah, that's a very important question. Let me make 2 points on it. I criticized the transportation package when it came to the Transportation Committee because it was not a transportation package, it was a roads and bridges package. Now, I support that roads and bridges package. I mean, I told you my view of income in the state. We need jobs. We need jobs desperately. And this is the only, the House passed the education budget 32-26. 2 Republicans voted no, and 1 disappeared, I guess. So. I believe we need a multimodal transportation system, but I think this is the only chance that we have to put jobs into the economy, and it's a very important bill. But we have to have a multimodal system. I'm the unofficial leader of the Choo-Choo Caucus, and we're working very hard to deal with the rail system, and that's not just the Cascade passenger trains that I'm working very hard to save, but it's a whole question of short haul and Class 1 railroads. Every time you have a train full of trucks, you're keeping those trucks off the road and you're saving a lot of money, and we need to take all elements. Now, whether it takes a constitutional amendment to broaden the Highway Trust Fund or other things, we just need to find ways to keep working very, very, very hard on that. You're absolutely right.
Hi, I'm David Poole, City Club member. We have late breaking news, good news from our neighbors to the north today. Microsoft profits continue to rise. Just shortly, last quarter on revenue of $8 billion, they had earnings of $2 billion to bring their cash reserves to $49 billion. And it warms my heart that they've got that money. The rub is that it's not just our money, but it's also our state money that we're sending up there for proprietary software, and we've got an open source bill. The Speaker of the House came to City Club and basically said she didn't see how it would save us money, and I guess Roger Byer in the Senate doesn't see how software that doesn't cost money would be cheaper than software that does cost money, and on the face of that, that seems silly to me. And I'm just wondering if the math adds up for you, and if this is the kind of hard-hitting analysis in the budget that we're kind of looking at currently.
First of all, it's my understanding that there are there is no restriction right now that requires a state not to use open source software, and there are many applications where open source software are used. I think the big problem is this, that restrictions on the state budgets, let me say something else. Basically, the information technology level in the state system is primitive. So, whatever it's using now, in most applications, it's nothing like what you expect in a modern environment, and we've not made the intellectual investment or the financial investment to bring the state information systems up to shape. In order to really affect, first of all, I favor open source software. Let me make that clear, and I would be willing to support that bill, in spite of the fact that many of my constituents have an opposing position. Many favor open source software. I think I probably received more email on open source software than on almost any other issue when it was being considered. But if you don't have legitimate staff, if you don't have people that can manage the development process, then you're really forced into buying things off the shelf that you just need to get Microsoft for dummies to be able to operate. And we've been starving state government more and more. That makes it very difficult to put that kind of investment in. But I certainly did favor that bill, and I think it certainly should have been considered.
Great, thank you.
I'm Kurt Wabering. I'm the chair of the research board. And in discussions we've had at the research board, we're very interested in putting forth reports and studies that are actionable, that affect public policy. 3 we have in the works are a healthcare safety net, financing education, early childhood. And I'm wondering what advice you, and also I'll ask this of Jane, what advice you would have to that we can that the city club can do things that where the reports that we do are actionable and affect public policy.
Well, I don't know how to tell you to make the reports more. The more recent experiences I've had have been chairing National Academy of Science committees where we've been trying to do exactly the same thing. But I think your reports are influential, and I wouldn't underestimate the impact that they have, particularly on informing the metropolitan legislators. I'm not sure a city club report is going to have a big effect on a legislator from Burns, but it is very clearly going to have an effect on us, and I think we read them. So I don't think you should underestimate the power. Now, public policy is not only about knowledge. I mean, this is one of the things that got me into the legislature. I've spent my career producing knowledge that informs public policy in the healthcare area, and it finally came to me that every time I did something useful, the legislature was screwing it up. So I mean, and now that I'm there, this is going to astound you, but not every one of my votes is informed by a particular knowledge base. There are a lot of them. I mean, I want to have as much knowledge as I possibly can, but usually you end up with alternatives that are not really knowledge-based. I mean, the open source versus the off-the-shelf software is one. I think I know as much about that as possible, and yet I see both sides of the issue. There are political considerations, but I just think, I really say keep doing what you're doing, because I think your reports and aim them at the issues that the legislature faces. I think they're very influential.
You also asked for me to comment, Kurt, wherever you went to. Hi. As a former chair of the research board, I think, I don't know what the board and the research board are up to right now because I'm not on it anymore, but I think for every report there needs to be a separate committee, because by the time the research committee finishes, it usually is pretty worn out. But maybe some people would like to go on, that should put together a plan for how to influence implementation of each one of those reports. I mean, you know, a goal and a strategy for doing it and what you need to do that, and recruit members who want to act on that, and then take it as far as it possibly can go under the city club's guidelines that we have for being a 501c3 organization, but we can still act and put together that plan, that action plan, and go for it.
Thank you. I think one of the goals of the board retreat this weekend is that we, under Chris Smith's able leadership, are going to be doing as much as we can on advocacy. One of the things that I forgot to mention is that this is our last program for the summer. We apparently think that we're in Paris, and so nobody's in Portland during August. So as a consequence, we don't have August programs, unless there's something major breaking, and then being nimble, we could change that as well. I would like very much today to thank Mitch, because this was a very important debate that was going on the floor. So thank you so much, Mitch, for coming away with that. And I would very much like to thank Jane for stepping up to the plate, or the podium as it were, so quickly. And just thank you all for being City Club members. It's great to see all of you, and we look forward to seeing you in September, when we're going to be starting a series of programs that relates to Oregon at the Crossroads. And I can't read what Wade is holding up in the background for me. I beg your pardon? And thank you very much. The sponsors, I thanked them at the first of the program, but Weyerhaeuser Company Foundation, Wells Fargo, and Legacy Health Systems. Thank you very much, and we're adjourned.